firstly to introduce myself, I'm the account manager here at Re-Leased, and Caleb is joining me today to take us through utility meters and direct on charge. Caleb, I'm sure many of you already know, heads up the platform here, so he's kindly joining me this morning. Now these sessions, they're designed to focus on specific areas of the platform that you might not be using at the moment, or just to top up your knowledge. As I said, during the session, you're able to ask questions, and what we'll do is if they're product specific, we'll be holding those until the end, and we'll be able to address those, or Caleb will. And then if we don't get through them all, what we will do is answer those in an email we will send out, which will also have a recording of the webinar. So without further ado, Caleb.
Yeah, thanks, Natalia. Hey guys, good morning. I can see that we had almost 100 people registered for today, so thank you very much for taking an interest and having to listen to our voices for about 15 minutes or so. We're not going to take up too much of your morning, and we'll be sending around a video of the session later if you have to tune out for any reason at all. But what I'll do is I'll just share my screen. Perfect. You guys should be able to see a Re-Leased dashboard. Feel free to type into the question bar if you're having any difficulty seeing that, and Natalia will be able to assist or give you some instructions as to how you can see it. But I'll make a start for now. So, as Natalia mentioned, we're going to take a look at utility meters and direct on charge. So these bits of functionality are designed to help you automate some of the invoicing processes likely associated with sort of larger assets or larger properties where you've got sort of regular bills occurring and you're finding that you're putting on quite manual invoices at the moment. So I will search for a example property, and this particular one is an industrial estate. It's around about 20 to 30 units, and both bits of functionality, both the utility meters and the direct on charge, are kept in the service charge tab on the left hand side. So as soon as I select that tab, you're taken to the direct on charge screen. The idea about the direct on charge is that you may receive a supplier invoice that you know that you need to be recovered by the tenants at a given apportionment. So quite typically we see things like insurance, council rates, maybe water bills, where it's already been decided the apportionment that you'll be charging those back out to. So I've already got a rule set up, one for council rates. So let's take a look. So for example, this rule states that every time I receive a supplier invoice for council rates, I want to then on charge my tenants at the following percentages. So I've got my tenancies listed down the left-hand side and their relevant apportionments. And you can see that I've got a non-recoverable amount of 0%. So I know that my percentages add up to 100 here. If I had sort of expired tenants at the properties, or perhaps tenants where they didn't have a current term, they would be grayed out as a default, but you can always put them back into the rule for whatever reason as well. You can also see here, I've got an option at the top of the screen. And essentially what this denotes is every time we raise those on-charge invoices, what sort of chart of account or what sort of income classification should I give those demands? So I've chosen one called sundry income, but you may want to call that sort of council rate income for this example, or just other revenue, whatever you guys may specify in your chart of account settings. But of course, if you're running our client account function or you use the Xero integration, that chart of account will have repercussions for your reporting. So for example, if you're using the client account function, when you receipt that money in, it's going to show on their client statement as sundry income, or on Xero side, when you're pulling reports, whether that be your profit and loss or your balance sheet, that income will look as if it's sundry income, not rent or other sort of service charge income as well. I also had that other rule on the page as well, and this one was slightly different. So I had this insurance one here. And as you can see, I've put insurance up the top, sundry income once again, but a lot of my tenants have a zero apportionment. And that's because this particular insurance policy that I receive from my broker every year, every quarter, whatever that invoicing frequency might be, is recharged just for 5 or so tenants. So you can see I've got large amounts of tenants with 0% and some with larger apportionments down here as well. So not every tenant needs to be included in the rule. You guys can have flexibility there. Let me just take you through setting up a direct on charge rule yourselves. So on that direct on charge screen, I can press create new, and you can see here I can select my account type. Now you guys might have one rule or one apportionment schedule for multiple things. So you may have it for, let's say, gas, but you might also have it for your cleaning bills as well. So we don't want you to create multiple rules for the same apportionment schedule. Let's say if this particular rule was split between these two tenants every time, I don't need a separate rule for both cleaning and gas there. Just to show how that workflow exists, I can now go create a supplier invoice and see what my on-charge invoices look like. So using my shortcut tool up the top, I'm just going to create a supplier invoice and select new expense invoice. I'm going to use my insurance example. So it's from Insurance Plus, and it's my insurance policy for 2020 coming up. My issue date is today's date, and the due date is 1st of December 2019. I of course need to select my relevant property. So it's my industrial estate where I've got my rule set up. My insurance policy invoice from my broker was £8,000. And here I can enter in my chart of account. As soon as I select that, a couple of tick boxes appear, and you can see that down the left-hand side. So because I've got my related property, and because I've selected the chart of account that's included in the rule, the system knows that some on-charge invoices are likely going to be wanted to be created. And you can see what the options I have here. So by default, if I was to attach the broker document, maybe they've sent me the policy, maybe they've sent me the actual PDF of the invoice, I can drag and drop that to this electronic copy of the invoice. And by default, when I email out my on-charges, it's going to attach that policy document to those tenancy on-charges. So I don't need to go and attach the document another 4 or 5 times, or with your larger properties, another 20, 30, 40 times, depending on how many tenancies you've got in there. What you've also got is the ability to hold the invoice until the on-charged invoices has been paid. And this is only relevant if you're using our client account function, not relevant if you're using Xero. But for whatever reason, if you wanted to hold off paying the supplier invoice in your payment run for Insurance Plus, you could ensure that it's not included in your payment run until it's been recovered from the on-charges that we're about to create on the next screen. Of course, you may also want to untick that on a regular basis as well. Okay, so I've got my £8,000 invoice, 9,600 gross, and I can save and approve that. The next screen is my direct on-charge screen. So I've got my tenancies for the property, but if I scroll down, I can see the relevant ones that fit the rule. So Rolf Palace South Limited are liable for 20% there, and I can see that apportionment as well. I can change that if I wanted to manually override it, and you can see that the amounts update, and you can see that my non-recoverable amounts also change, or I can just go ahead and generate that invoice. So you can see a lot of the information is filled through. So it knows I want to generate the invoice for that particular tenant. It's given me the description that I inputted on the previous screen, and I can obviously amend that if I want to break it up a little bit more for the tenant or give more description. It's picked my default income code for sundry income, and obviously the unit price is their apportionment. And if I had done any document or attachments, that would appear here as well for me to send. So I can press save and approve, or I can also save, approve, and email all in one click. Just wait for my internet to pick up. And you can see here, it's got my template that I've wanted, it's got the invoice, and I could go and email that out if I wanted to, rather than having to go back through and email out all the invoices individually. So of course, you can go through and generate your invoices and email them out via one click. And obviously, then you've got your insurance invoices on charges all automatically created for you. Perfect. If there's any further questions on the direct on charges, please let us know and we can pop any responses in the email that we'll send out with a review of this webinar. The other section is the utility meters. So if I go back to my property page and back to the service charge tab, I've got my utility meter section here. And the idea of this functionality is that you can set up the meter structure that you would have at your actual physical property. So if you've got an office block, for example, you may just have one utility meter that serves all the units within the building, or you might have a meter for each unit. So each tenant has their own meter that you would input the reading for, or like my example here, you've got a few different meters around the property where different sub bits of tenants are allocated to. So I've got 4 meters here at the moment, and I'll go through the creation of a new meter in a second. But you can see here that I can go back and I can search for a meter, and it automatically does that search as I type. And I can go back and look at the historic readings on that meter. So for my meter SW21, I can take a look and click on readings. And I can see that my initial reading on the 1st of October 2019 was 1,400 units consumed. I've then, at the end of the month, on the 31st of October, put in my new reading of 1950, and I'll take you through how you can put your new readings on. The software then calculates the amount of units used, and based on the rules and based on the prices that I put on when I first set up the meter, you can see that it's figured out what the usage total was and what the charge total was also. If I wanted to take a look back at the invoices that were generated as a result of me inputting that reading, I can select those invoices, and you can see the summary here with a link through to the invoice. Let me just show you what an invoice from a utility meter looks like. I'll open that in a new tab. Very similar to any other kind of sales invoice that you would create on the system. So you've got your tenant name, you've got the property, but you've also got the description, which the software as a default will create for you. So it's got the meter name, it's got the start reading for that period, the end reading for that period, and also the calculation that was used to figure out what their pricing was as well. And you'll see in a moment that you can also have fixed line charges or any other type of standing costs associated with those meters. Okay. So if I wanted to go and input a reading for one meter in particular, I could go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to stick with my example for this one here and click on readings. I can then select new reading, and I can then input the relevant details. So it lets me know when the previous reading was taken on and the reading that took place. So I'm going to say that I took a reading today on the 28th, and my reading was 2,500 units. I've got my unit price here, which has been derived from the original setup of the meter. And I've also got this drop down to say whether or not I would like to raise invoices off the back of this reading. I'm going to say yes, and you've got the option to not do that and just keep a record of the charges rather than creating demands off the back of them just above. Okay. Once I press save, you'll see that I've got a pending line now up the top here. And I can press generate invoices if I want to then go and see the invoices that will be raised. So I've got my invoice due date. I want those invoices to be due on the 1st of December. Then I can go ahead and generate the invoice. So for this particular example, I had 4 different units or 4 different tenants liable for that meter, and it has now created 4 different invoices based on what their liability was for each of those meters there. What I'm going to do, I'm going to set up a new meter just so you guys can see how to structure that across different tenancies and what that looks like. So on my utility meter page, just in case you missed that, I selected new meter, and I can enter in the details here. So you might have a code or some sort of reference for your meter. This one here I'm just going to make up. And this particular meter is sort of located at the back of my industrial site. So I'm going to give it a little title as such. Very similar to the direct on charge screen, I can select the default account that I want my invoices to generate to. So I've got an income code for utility income, which I'm going to select. And then I can add in my unit price for each unit consumed. And for this particular one, it's 12p per unit consumed. And on the right-hand side, I can then enter in my different tenant liabilities. So I know that Wallace & Sons are located at the back of the property, and their meter liability on this is 50%, whereas Kennedy Water are liable for 30%. And as you can see, my non-recoverable amount is being calculated alongside this, and Holbrook Northern, 20% here as well. For this particular meter, I've got a couple of standing charges, so I can add that here. So I've got a fixed line hire for this meter, and it is a set fee. So every time I raise a demand for my reading, I want to charge my tenants £30 alongside their unit reading here, that 12p per unit. As you can see, I can set a daily rate or a set fee, which is more of a fixed amount, but you could also do a daily rate, and that will figure out the time between your readings and multiply whatever that daily rate is to the gap between your readings there. Once again, I'm going to select utility income as my chart of account code, and then I can save that meter. It asks me to put an initial reading on. So I'm only setting this meter up, let's say I'm doing this retrospectively, I set this up on the 1st of November. And my reading at that point was 4,800 units, and I can press save there. Okay, I'm going to remove my search option, and you can now see that I've got 5 different meters across my property. Earlier we looked at how to add in a reading for 1 meter at a time. Obviously, if you've got, let's say, 100 meters at a property, we don't expect you to go through and add that reading one by one. We do have a bulk update function here. So by clicking that orange button, you can select when the reading was taken on. So let's say I've done this on the 28th of November, and I am going to put in my current reading for each of the meters here. So I may receive this from my facilities manager. I may myself be going around on site and getting these readings. However you may do it, it just requires someone to input the readings onto this screen here. And obviously you can compare them alongside the previous reading. So I'm just going to quickly do that. And I'm not going to do the SW21 because I've already put a reading on for the 28th of November. So I'm going to leave that one there. And then I'm going to do it for this one here. There's a little bit of logic built in, whereas if I try to put in a meter reading which is less than the previous one, you'll see that I won't be able to press save, and I get an error. So it forces me to put a reading that is higher, just to ensure that we sort of reduce any error in inputting. Okay. And I now have 2 options available to me. I can now press save, and I can come back later and generate those invoices, or I can press save and generate invoices now. I'm just going to press save because the workflow is fairly similar to pressing that button there and coming back at a later point and pressing them. Okay, so I'm on my utility meter screen here, and I can see that my reading date is all 28th of November. And if I was to go and select any one of these, you'll see that the reading that I put in today is pending. I now want to go and raise those invoices. So I can press generate invoices here, and it looks at all of the pending charges that I've got available to me. And I can tick and untick the ones that I would like to raise demands for. I'm going to select all of them, and I'm going to want all my invoices to be due on the 1st of December. If I wanted different due dates, I would just have to go into each meter and generate those invoices at a per meter level. Perfect. I've got a little tick there to say invoices generated successfully. And there's a couple of ways that you can go and view those invoices. Either you can go to the invoices tab, one above the service charges, and you'll be able to see all of them listed here. Or if you want to look at them on a per meter basis, I can go back to my utility meter, and I can come and view all the meter readings that I've done for this particular one here. And they sit by default as awaiting approval. So either a member of your accounts team or a surveyor has that now on their awaiting approval list so that they can go through and ensure that they're happy with that invoice to be sent to the tenant. If there are any further questions on that or any anomalies that you guys might have at one of your assets or one of your properties, feel free to write in on this question bar, and we can obviously resolve that and send it out so that everyone benefits from that question. That's the utility meters and direct on charge at a relatively high level. Feel free to contact one of the team if you've got any specific questions, but we appreciate you tuning in and taking some time out of your morning.
Cool, thank you, Caleb. Well done. So hopefully you guys can now utilize that feature, excuse the pun. Now what I'll be doing is sending out an email following this, as Caleb said, with the video, but also we'd love to get your feedback and also requests for any topics and additional questions that you have. So what I'll do is include a link there for you. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in, and this is the first of many. So we'll see you next time.
Thanks guys.
See ya.